All right, it's Mrs. Zimnick, and I'm going to take you through some new ideas of thinking in the Industrial Revolution and also how socialism started to grow. Think about why it would appeal to people during this time. As we go through this, think about the negative effects of the Industrial Revolution that were hitting, especially the workers, really hard, and why an idea like socialism might appeal to them. So, first thing I'd like you to do, we're going to do this in class actually, is definitely make sure you have read through Chapter 7, Section 4, and there's the pages there, 260 to 265, and understand these different economists and what they believed was the ideal form of government. What role should government play in their economic systems and why? Okay, so we're going to look at Thomas Malthus, David Ricardo, Jeremy Bentham, Karl Marx, and I also want to talk a little bit about social Darwinism. Not Charles Darwin like you studied in biology necessarily, but a little bit more of this idea called social Darwinism, which is going to take Charles Darwin's ideas of biology like plants and trees and attempt to apply it to people. So these are the main people we want to focus on. We're also going to mention Adam Smith. I know we talked about him back when we did the Enlightenment, but he's going to come back because we're going to contrast him, especially with Karl Marx. So, first thing you want to understand, and we've kind of been hinting at this already, is that not everybody was happy with the changes that the Industrial Revolution brought. I know that I mentioned, I think in 7th period, about the Luddites. They're kind of one of my favorite groups in world history. Here's the Luddites over here breaking the machines. I always call them the original Rage Against the Machine. The Luddites were farmers in England that were really upset about the way that these machines were taking people's jobs and ruining the agricultural system that was their lifeline. So what they would do is they would go into these factories in Manchester and in London and take farming tools, to make even more of a statement there, and break all the machines. But obviously it doesn't really stop progress. But they did make a good solid attempt. Here's a little modern day political cartoon. I thought that was kind of funny. So those are the Luddites. Not everybody was happy. And, especially the workers, they definitely had long hours, low wages, dangerous work. Children were working because there weren't any regulations on school. There weren't any rules about minimum wage or anything. So it was a problem. So there's going to be some different people that try to make some theories or some ideas about how to deal with this massive growing poverty that we see, especially in the cities. Thomas Malthus is one of them. And he had a really negative view of the factory system. He's like, Debbie Downer of our philosophers here, the Industrial Revolution. And he actually said that the only checks on population growth, since population was starting to really expand in Europe, he said that nature's, quote, natural methods of war, disease, and famine were the only way to stop an uncontrollable population. So, that's positive, right? So he kind of said those things were unfortunately good because they would stop population growth from getting out of control. Ultimately, we're going to see that his views proved wrong. We're going to have plenty of war, disease, and famine, but we're still going to grow our population, and we know that today. We're up to 7 billion people. So his idea that war, disease, and famine would check population is just not going to be true. David Ricardo is another one we're going to see here. Wow, my pictures are messed up. Let me move them for you. He's another laissez-faire economist, which is exactly what Adam Smith was, right? Laissez-faire means leave alone, let be, hands off. But he said there was a flaw with Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand, and he said that the invisible hand's not going to work correctly because what he called the iron law of wages will push. It'll be a hand smacking down wages because even though businesses are going to be more profitable, they're not going to take that money and pay their workers more. They're going to be greedy and continue to pay their workers little money in hopes of getting a bigger profit. So a lot of that did seem to be true in his time in the 1800s, because there wasn't any workers' compensation laws or minimum wage laws especially, that some of these business owners were making tons of money both in England, in the United States, guys like Rockefeller, Carnegie, but they weren't pouring that into wages for their workers. And so you can kind of see how some of that was coming true. But he definitely opposed any government help for the poor. He was not a fan of handouts. He was not a fan of government stepping in. He was just kind of stating what he thought was obvious and also a very negative view that, this is just how it's going to be. The iron law of wages is going to keep wages down, and there's really nothing we can do about that, except, he said, to work harder and try to get yourself out of the working class, and also limit the size of your families. Don't have, 7 or 8 kids so that you have all those mouths to feed. So these are really negative views. Jeremy Bentham He's a little bit of our hippie back then. He's got a more positive view, and he founded something called utilitarianism. So utilitarianism is the idea that society should be of the greatest happiness for the greatest number of citizens, and laws should only be there if they are useful. So if a law is not useful, you should get rid of it, which sounds good. In theory, it doesn't usually work that way, because I think sometimes we could probably think of some laws that aren't necessarily useful but are still necessary for society to function. But he did influence a guy named John Stuart Mill, who will then go on in England to really start pushing for laws to protect workers. So he's definitely an influential guy. If there's that should say any Lost fans in the house, that got messed up. But if anybody watched Lost, yeah, I know this is old. John Locke was a character, which is weird enough. I'm sure that meant something because he's from the Enlightenment. And he took the name Jeremy Bentham. So all kinds of weird history references in the movie Lost, or the TV show Lost, sorry. Okay, this shaggy-looking man is Karl Marx. And boy, are we going to talk a lot about him. He is the father of what we call communism, okay? Socialism and communism are different. You're going to hear him say socialism. But communism is a little more extreme even than socialism was. So under his system of socialism, he believed the people as a whole, not individuals like me and you, people owned the means of production. And means of production are things like factories, farms, roads, anything that you can make something on. So he wanted to see, instead of a few rich people owning those, he wanted everyone to own them and share them equally. He said that's only fair that the workers will share them. He was good buddies with this guy, Friedrich Engels, and he wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848 where he laid out all his ideas. Now think about this. What did we just learn about was going on in 1848? There are tons of riots and upheaval all over Europe, right? We've got our liberals and our reactionaries. We've got people that want to move forward and people that want to go back. And Karl Marx is being influenced by the things that are happening around him in that year, and he's writing this book about ways to make society more fair. So he's definitely, in his point of view, speaking up for the workers. So what he said is eventually workers in every industrialized country in the world will rise up. The 90% or so of workers who are being disadvantaged and taken advantage of, they will rise up and they will overthrow the owning class. And when they do that, then you get this situation, communism, which is a completely classless society. No one is rich, no one is poor, everyone is equal. It sounds great, right? Everybody's got a job, everybody has a place to live. Communism on paper is a very, very positive philosophy. However, what we're going to see in world history is that, first off, it never worked out the way it was supposed to. And second off, it's not going to really happen this way in any communist system. It'll still be a few rich at the top and the vast majority of poor. But this was his dream. Okay, this was his dream. So, some little fun Karl Marx for you. I like this one. Santa Marx is going to take all your toys and redistribute them equally amongst the masses of kids. Rather appropriate for this time of year. And this changes the lyrics to Santa Claus is Coming to Town. So just a few Karl Marx jokes. Okay. Now, I want to discuss communism versus capitalism. And once again, I got to move these around a little bit for you. So communism would be like what used to be the Soviet Union. Democratic capitalism is what we have in this country. Okay? So under communism, there's always, before the communist revolution happens, there's always going to be a class struggle. Karl Marx says it's all about class. And there's two classes. The proletariat, that's a fancy word for workers, and the bourgeoisie. This is a fancy word for the owning class. Okay, they're about 10%. They're the factory owners. They're the rich people. These are the 90% or so of people that are the workers. Marx says eventually the proletariat will get so angry with the bourgeoisie they're going to have a violent revolution. But he says, you know what? It's going to be violent. It's not going to be pretty. Because these guys, they're not going to want to leave. So they have to violently overthrow them. All right? Well, now, after that, after the mass blood and chaos, then it's going to be great. Then everybody's going to be equal. It's guaranteed. Well, how do you guarantee that everybody's equal? A couple things have to happen. Number one, you have to stay put. And you have to do exactly what you're told. In a command economy like this, where the government is taking complete control, they assign you a job. They tell you where you can live. They even, in some cases, tell you what you can wear, what you can listen to, what's going to be on the radio or eventually the TV. All has to be approved by the government. They have to force you to be equal. The other thing Marx said is you don't want to trade with other countries. You want to make yourself completely self-reliant. Because he said all wars are started about trade. And when you think about that, think about the world he's writing that in, you can probably say, yeah, okay, I get why he's saying that. No personal freedoms. You've got to take away, usually the right to religion is the first thing to go. Most communist countries did not allow religion at all. Definitely no freedom of speech. And your life is really dominated by this government. But what do you get in return? Everybody's equal. Everybody's got a job. You might hate your job. You might not be allowed to complain about anything, but you do have it. So there are guarantees. In our system, what do we have? We have lots of social classes. Now, the good thing I think about our system is we have class mobility. There's nothing saying you have to stay in your class. If you're born into the lower class, you can move up. Now, it is difficult, and studies have shown it's most of us in America live in and die in the same class we started out with. But it's very, it's possible. There's no law saying you can't. It's just difficult. You have to work hard. There's a lot of inequality. It's definitely an unfair society. I think we can say that some people are, born into some wealth and others are not. And but the thing is, again, we can change that. We can change that. There's no guarantees. You might work really, really hard and you might still fail. And that's no fault of your own. Maybe you're an entrepreneur, you take a risk, you start a business, you think this is going to be great. And then something happens, or your product doesn't sell, or the stock market crashes, and that's happened from time to time. And so, bad things happen to good people. But again, the thing is, we can still change it, right? We have that ability. You don't have that ability over here. We have personal freedoms. We have personal choice. And that's something that you don't see over this system. So there's positives and negatives to both. I'm still definitely quite glad that I'm in this system because I like my personal freedom. What we're going to see about why this doesn't work is that in general, any country that tried communism, the restriction of personal freedoms is going to be what brings it down. People don't like to be told what to do. Think about it. When your parents might be on your case or, somebody saying, you have to say this, you have to do that. We don't like it. We're by nature, I think, we like to have our own personality and our own say. And I think that's probably the biggest flaw in this system. All right. Last thing I want to explain is just understand, this is some OGT fun, that different kinds of economies emerge here. And this is something we'll see a lot for the OGT next year, but I'm just throwing it out there. A market economy, this is like what we have in this country. Buyers and sellers make the main decisions and individuals exchange things. So we operate on something called supply and demand. When supply goes up, usually demand goes down, price goes down. When supply goes down, demand goes up, price goes up. We use self-interest, and competition are the main points. We want to buy things that we like, that drives the market. And for the most part, we are relatively laissez-faire and not that much controlled by the government. We do have some laws. We have minimum wage and stuff. But overall, it's still a pretty free market, Not as free as it was maybe 100 years ago. There are regulations now, but nothing like over here, centrally planned. This is where the central government, not individuals like me and you, this is where the government makes all the important economic decisions. It's also called a command economy. Think about that. When you see that word, command, think about it. It means somebody's telling you what to do. So maybe that'll help you remember. Government controls the means of production. And often that does result in poor quality goods and a lot of shortages because people aren't making them because they want to. People are making them because they're told to. And I think that's another key difference between communism and capitalism. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of a background here on our important thinkers. Thanks for listening. Come ready to discuss, and I will see you tomorrow.